Close your eyes and let your breath settle into a gentle rhythm. Tonight we travel through time, not forward but backward, into the spaces between what we know and what we've forgotten. This is a story whispered across millennia, hidden in plain sight within the myths every culture on Earth has told since the beginning of memory. A story that asks one simple, unsettling question. What if we are not the first? The air is cool. The night is deep. And somewhere in the darkness between sleeping and waking, ancient voices begin to speak. They speak of worlds that came before ours, worlds that rose like dawn and fell like night, worlds erased so completely that only their echoes remain, woven into the stories we tell our children, carved into stones we no longer understand, and written in languages we've spent centuries trying to decode. Tonight, we listen to those echoes. We follow them backward through 7 ages of humanity. 7 cycles of birth, brilliance, and oblivion. And as we journey together through the myths of lost civilizations, you may find yourself recognizing something, a pattern, a feeling, a memory that doesn't quite belong to you, yet somehow lives inside you all the same. So let your mind drift. Let the weight of the day dissolve. And let us begin at the beginning, or perhaps at the 7th beginning, with the question humanity has always been too afraid to answer. Are we the 7th civilization to walk this earth? In the highlands of Tibet, monks preserve a story older than their monasteries. They speak of 6 suns that rose and set before ours, 6 ages of mankind, each one destroyed by a different catastrophe. Fire consumed the first, water drowned the second, wind scattered the third, ice entombed the fourth, darkness swallowed the 5th. And the 6th, they say, was ended by the earth itself, trembling and splitting until the mountains fell and the valleys rose. Half a world away, the Maya carved similar tales into stone. They too spoke of worlds before this one. 4 previous creations, each one an experiment, each one flawed, each one wiped away to make room for the next. The gods, they said, were learning, building, perfecting, and with each destruction came a new beginning, a new humanity shaped from the lessons of the old. In ancient Greece, Hesiod wrote of 5 ages of man, the Golden Age where humanity lived like gods, the Silver Age where foolishness crept in, the Bronze Age violent and proud, the Heroic Age glorious but doomed, and finally our own age, the Iron Age, destined to end in suffering and chaos before the cycle begins anew. The Hopi people of North America tell of 3 previous worlds, each one destroyed when humanity forgot the sacred path. The first world was consumed by fire, the second froze in ice, the third drowned beneath endless floods, and now we live in the 4th world, teetering on the edge of the same forgetfulness that doomed the others. In Hindu cosmology, time moves in vast cycles called yugas, 4 great ages repeating eternally. The Satya Yuga, an age of truth and perfection. The Treta Yuga, where virtue begins to decline. The Dvapara Yuga, where darkness and light balance precariously. And the Kali Yuga, our current age, where ignorance reigns and the world spirals toward inevitable destruction before being reborn once more. The Aztecs spoke of 5 suns, 5 epochs of creation. We live, they believed, under the 5th sun, an age destined to end in earthquakes so powerful they would shake the very fabric of existence. Indigenous Australian cultures preserved Dreamtime stories spanning tens of thousands of years, stories of lands that sank beneath the sea, of coastlines that vanished overnight, of ancestors who walked across bridges of land that no longer exist. These are not metaphors, these are memories, passed down through song and ceremony, of a world that looked entirely different than the one we know today. Even the Bible hints at this pattern. Before the flood, there was another world, a world of giants, of great cities, of knowledge so profound it threatened the natural order. And when the waters came, that world was washed away, leaving only Noah's family and the animals to begin again. From Mesopotamia to Polynesia, from Scandinavia to South America, every corner of the earth preserves some version of the same story, a story of cycles, a story of lost ages, a story of worlds that came before ours, worlds that thrived and fell, leaving behind only whispers in the dark. These are not separate myths. They are chapters of the same book, written in different languages, told through different voices, but describing the same fundamental truth. Humanity has walked this path before, and each time we reach a certain height, each time we touch the stars with our ambitions, something happens. Something resets the clock, something ends the age and begins it anew. But here's what makes these myths so remarkable, so unsettling, so impossible to dismiss as mere fantasy. They don't just describe the destruction, they describe what came after. They describe survivors, small groups of people who carried knowledge forward, who rebuilt civilization from ash and ruin, who taught the next generation how to plant, how to navigate by stars, how to build, how to remember. These myths are not warnings of what might happen, they are records of what did happen. And when we look at them not as stories, but as history, a pattern emerges, a pattern so precise, so consistent, so universal, that it demands we ask ourselves, what if these myths are true? What if 6 civilizations really did rise and fall before ours? And what if we are the 7th, living out the same cycle, approaching the same precipice, preparing for the same ending our ancestors described with such clarity and dread? Let that question settle into your mind as you drift deeper into rest, because tonight we will follow these myths backward through time, tracing their origins, examining their evidence, and discovering what they reveal about the world we live in now, a world that may be far older, far more fragile, and far more cyclical than we ever imagined. Every civilization on Earth, no matter how isolated, no matter how different their languages or customs, preserves a memory of a golden age. A time before time, a paradise lost, an era when humanity lived in harmony with nature, when knowledge flowed like water, when the gods walked among mortals, and when the world itself was younger, purer, unspoiled. The Greeks called it the age of Kronos, when Saturn ruled and humanity knew no labor, no sorrow, no death. The earth gave freely of its abundance. No one owned property. No one waged war. People lived for centuries, and when they finally passed, it was like falling into a gentle sleep. In the Vedic tradition of India, this was the Satya Yuga, the age of truth. During this first epoch, humans stood 10 feet tall. They lived for 100,000 years. They communed directly with the divine. There was no disease, no deception, no distinction between rich and poor. The earth was so fertile that a single seed could feed an entire village. The Chinese spoke of the age of the Yellow Emperor, a time of perfect governance when the natural and human worlds existed in seamless balance. The Egyptians remembered Zep-Tepi the first time when the gods themselves ruled Egypt, teaching humanity architecture, astronomy, medicine, and writing. Norse mythology preserves the memory of a world before the current one, a world destroyed in Ragnarok but destined to be reborn, green and beautiful, populated by survivors who would rebuild paradise. The Dogon people of Mali tell of a time when the Nommo beings from the star Sirius lived alongside humanity, sharing wisdom about the cosmos, about astronomy, about the nature of reality itself. When they departed, the Golden Age ended. In Mesoamerica, the first age was one of giants, of beings who could move stones with their minds, who built cities that touched the clouds, who understood the movements of planets and stars with such precision that their calendars are still accurate today, thousands of years after their civilization vanished. But here's what makes these Golden Age myths so compelling. They don't describe primitive people living in simple harmony. They describe advanced civilizations, people with knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, engineering, agriculture, medicine, people who built monuments that still confound modern architects, people who developed writing systems, legal codes, philosophical frameworks. The myths describe a world where knowledge was not discovered but remembered, as if civilization didn't evolve slowly from hunter-gatherers, but appeared suddenly fully formed, carrying techniques and insights that seem to have no origin point. And then in every single tradition something happens. The Golden Age doesn't fade gradually, it ends abruptly, catastrophically. The myths describe the same sequence of events with eerie consistency. First comes hubris. Humanity grows proud. We forget our place. We challenge the gods. We push beyond the boundaries we were meant to respect. The Greeks said humans tried to storm Olympus. The Bible said humanity built a tower to reach heaven. The Hindu texts speak of weapons so powerful they could split atoms and boil oceans. The Maya describe a world destroyed because people forgot to give thanks. Then comes the warning. The gods, the ancestors, the wise ones, they see what's coming. They try to tell us. They send signs, strange lights in the sky, animals behaving strangely, prophets speaking of doom. But humanity, in its arrogance, doesn't listen. We dismiss the warnings as superstition. We continue on our path. And then comes the catastrophe, swift, merciless, global. The sky darkens, the earth shakes, the waters rise, fire falls from above, ice spreads from the poles. In a single day and night, the myths say, the world changes. Cities that took centuries to build vanish in hours. Millions perish. The landscape itself transforms beyond recognition. But the myths don't end there, because after every catastrophe comes the most important part of the story, the survivors. In every tradition, a small group escapes. Sometimes they're warned by a god, sometimes they're guided by intuition, sometimes they're simply lucky. But they survive, and they carry something precious forward: seeds, tools, animals, books, memories, knowledge. Noah and his ark, Deucalion and Pyrrha in Greece, Manu in India, the Hopi emerging from the underworld, the Polynesian navigators sailing to new islands, the ancestors in dreamtime walking across land bridges before they sank. These survivors become the teachers of the next age. They show the new humanity how to plant crops, how to read the stars, how to build shelter, how to preserve memory. They are the reason civilization doesn't have to start from absolute zero after each collapse. They are the bridge between one world and the next. And here's the detail that should make us pause, that should make us wonder, that should keep us awake in the quiet hours of the night. The myths don't describe these survivors as primitive refugees. They describe them as culture bearers, as wise ones, as people who arrive in new lands with knowledge the locals don't possess. Knowledge of architecture, agriculture, astronomy, navigation. The Egyptians said the gods taught them how to build. The Sumerians said civilization was a gift from beings who came from the water. The Maya spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, arriving from across the sea to teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Incas remembered Viracocha, a bearded stranger who appeared after the flood and showed them how to build their empire. These are not stories of savages crawling from the ruins. These are stories of refugees from a destroyed civilization, bringing fragments of lost knowledge to rebuild a new world. And if we take these myths seriously, if we treat them not as fantasy but as distorted memory, then a profound question emerges. What if the Golden Age wasn't the beginning of civilization? What if it was the height of a previous civilization, a civilization so advanced, so sophisticated, so widespread, that its destruction seemed like the end of the world itself? And what if we, in our modern cities, with our modern technology, are not the pinnacle of human achievement, but merely the latest iteration of a cycle that has repeated 6 times before? Let that thought drift through your mind as your breathing deepens, as your body relaxes, as sleep begins to pull you under. Because in the next part of our journey, we will examine what happens when myths align with science, when ancient stories match geological records, when the impossible becomes merely forgotten. For centuries, scholars dismissed ancient myths as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Thunder was gods fighting, earthquakes were monsters stirring beneath the earth, floods were divine punishment for sin. These were stories, nothing more. Colourful, culturally rich, but ultimately fictional accounts designed to teach moral lessons or explain the unexplainable. But something strange began happening in the last 100 years. As our scientific instruments grew more sophisticated, as we developed ways to peer deeper into Earth's past, as we decoded ice cores and ocean sediments and fossil records, we started finding something unexpected. The myths were right, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. In the 1920s, geologists mapping the ocean floor discovered something impossible: massive underwater structures off the coast of India, Japan, Cuba, the Mediterranean. Formations too geometric to be natural, right angles, staircases, terraces, city blocks, lying hundreds of feet beneath the waves in waters that haven't been dry land for over 10,000 years. The structures were dismissed as natural formations. Underwater rocks, they said, can create unusual shapes. But as sonar technology improved, the details became harder to explain away. These weren't random rock formations. They were organized, planned, built. Off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, divers found what appears to be a stepped pyramid, complete with carved symbols, tool marks, and roads, connecting different sections. Marine geologists dated the structure to at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older. But according to conventional history, no civilization existed 10,000 years ago capable of such construction. Near the Gulf of Kambat in India, sonar revealed an entire city spread across 9 kilometers of seabed. Subsequent dives recovered pottery, tools, and building materials. Carbon dating put the artifacts at 9,500 years old. Again, this predates any known civilization in the region by thousands of years. Off the coast of Cuba, deep-sea robots captured images of megalithic stones arranged in structures resembling pyramids and roads, lying nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. The only way these structures could be at that depth is if they were built when sea levels were dramatically lower, which means they're at least 12,000 years old. The Mediterranean holds similar secrets. Underwater archaeologists have discovered what appear to be harbour structures, buildings and roads dating back to the end of the last Ice Age. These ruins align perfectly with ancient Greek myths about Atlantis, about cities swallowed by the sea, about a time when the coastlines looked entirely different. And then there's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, perhaps the most paradigm-shattering discovery of all. Excavated in the 1990s, this massive stone complex dates back 11,600 years. That's 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7,000 years older than the pyramids. It predates agriculture, pottery, writing, everything we thought was necessary for civilization to exist. Yet Göbekli Tepe displays sophisticated astronomy, complex engineering, artistic expression, organized religion, and coordinated labor on a massive scale. The stones, some weighing 20 tons, were quarried, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and symbols, transported to the site, and erected in perfect circular arrangements aligned to celestial events. The site's existence rewrites everything we thought we knew about human history. But it does something else too. It validates the myths. Because Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 10,000 BCE. Not by time, not by natural disaster, but intentionally. Someone carefully filled in the entire complex with earth, preserving it perfectly, as if they knew they had to hide it, as if they knew something was coming, as if they were preparing a time capsule for a future civilization to discover when the time was right. The timing of Göbekli Tepe's burial coincides exactly with the end of the Younger Dryas period, a mysterious span of time when Earth's climate underwent rapid, catastrophic changes. Global temperatures plunged, then soared, ice sheets melted in geological eye blinks. Sea levels rose over 400 feet in some estimates, drowning coastlines around the world. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. This wasn't gradual climate change. This was cataclysmic, and it happened exactly when the myths say it did. The flood myths aren't metaphors, they're memories of coastlines drowning, of islands vanishing, of cities swallowed in days, of survivors fleeing inland carrying what they could, leaving everything else to the rising waters. Ice cores from Greenland show the same story. Around 12,800 years ago, something happened. The ice contains layers of iridium, a rare element usually found in meteorites. It contains microscopic diamonds that only form under extreme heat and pressure. It contains ash layers suggesting massive wildfires that burned across entire continents simultaneously. The evidence suggests an impact, something from space, possibly a comet fragment breaking apart and hitting Earth in multiple locations. The impacts would have triggered immediate devastation, shock waves, fires, tsunamis, but the long-term effects would have been even worse. Ash blocking out the sun, temperatures plummeting, the beginning of the Younger Dryas cold period. Then, as the ice melted, catastrophic flooding. This is what the myths describe, not one event, but a cascade of disasters, fire from the sky, darkness, cold, floods, all happening in rapid succession. The Ojibwe people of North America tell of a star that fell and brought fire. The Cherokee speak of the moon splitting and raining destruction. The Lakota remember a time when the sun disappeared and ice covered the world. Australian Aboriginal stories describe floods so vast they reshaped the entire continent exactly when geological evidence shows sea levels rose dramatically. These aren't coincidences, these are eyewitness accounts passed down through oral tradition, preserved with remarkable accuracy across thousands of years, and when we map the locations of these myths geographically, we find something extraordinary. Every coastal civilization has flood myths, every inland civilization has impact or fire myths, every northern civilization has ice myths. The myths cluster geographically based on which disaster would have affected that region most severely. But they all describe the same time period, the same global catastrophe, the same ending of an age, which means the Golden Age myths, the stories of 6 previous worlds, the tales of civilizations before ours, aren't fantasies. They're history. History we forgot. History we dismissed. History we're only now beginning to recover from. And if the myths were right about the ice and the sand, accurately preserved the memory of global catastrophes, if they correctly described the existence of advanced civilizations now buried under water or frozen in ice, then we must ask ourselves, what else did the myths try to tell us? What other warnings did they encode? What other patterns did they recognize? And most urgently, most pressingly, most terrifyingly, if we are the 7th civilization approaching the same heights as the 6 before us, then what does the cycle suggest happens next? Rest now. Let your mind drift on these questions like a boat on a dark ocean. Because in the next part of our journey, we will explore the most unsettling aspect of the myths, the survivors' warnings about what to watch for, what to prepare for, and what humanity must remember when the cycle turns again. After every catastrophe described in the myths, after the fires cool and the waters recede and the darkness lifts, the survivors gather, and they do something remarkable. They try to preserve what they know. They try to ensure that the next civilization, the next cycle, the next age of humanity doesn't have to rediscover everything from scratch. But how do you preserve knowledge across a cataclysm? How do you ensure that wisdom survives when cities drown, when libraries burn, when entire continents are reshaped in a matter of years? The survivors found ways, ingenious ways, ways we're only now beginning to understand. First, they built in stone. Not because stone is beautiful, though it is, not because stone is sacred, though they believed it was. They built in stone because stone survives. Wood rots, cloth disintegrates, metal corrodes, even ceramics shatter. But stone, massive stone, precisely cut and carefully placed, stone can last for tens of thousands of years, waiting silently for someone to find it and read its message. The Great Pyramid of Giza isn't just a tomb, it's a library written in mathematics. The structure encodes the golden ratio, pi, the speed of light, the dimensions of the Earth, the distance to the Sun. It's aligned to true north with precision we struggle to match today. It's positioned at the exact center of Earth's landmass. These aren't coincidences, these are messages, mathematical truths encoded in stone for anyone intelligent enough to measure and calculate. Stonehenge, for all its mystery, is a calendar and an observatory. The stones mark solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, even the 18.6-year wobble of the moon's orbit. It's a computer built to track celestial mechanics, ensuring that future generations would never lose the ability to measure time and predict seasons. The Nazca lines in Peru are vast enough to be seen from the sky, drawn across a desert so dry they've lasted thousands of years. But why would ancient people create art only visible from above? Unless they weren't art, unless they were markers, landing zones, navigation aids, messages to whoever might be looking from above saying, "We were here, we knew, we remembered." Göbekli Tepe, that impossible temple, buried intentionally, encodes astronomical information from 12,000 years ago. The pillars display constellations as they appeared in the sky during the last catastrophe. It's a timestamp, a bookmark in history saying this is when it happened. This is what the sky looked like when our world ended. Around the globe, megalithic structures share impossible similarities. Polygonal masonry, where stones are cut into complex interlocking shapes without mortar. Precision drilling that suggests tools we have no record of. Acoustic properties that amplify sound in specific frequencies. Alignments to stars that haven't been in those positions for over 10,000 years. These structures aren't random, they're a network, a global system of markers, calendars, time capsules, all built to survive the catastrophe the survivors knew would eventually come again. But stone can only preserve so much. Numbers, alignments, astronomical data, yes. But what about medicine, agriculture, metallurgy, philosophy? How do you preserve the complexity of civilization when you can't write it all in stone? The survivors found another way: myth, story, oral tradition. Stories are powerful. Stories are memorable. Stories, when told with repetition and ceremony, can survive for thousands of years with remarkable accuracy. Aboriginal Australians have oral traditions stretching back over 40,000 years, describing landscapes that exist only underwater now, preserved perfectly through song and ceremony passed from generation to generation. But the survivors did something brilliant. They didn't just tell straightforward histories. They encoded knowledge in symbolic language. They wrapped scientific data in religious ceremony. They preserved practical wisdom in stories about gods and heroes. The myth of Osiris in Egypt describes death and resurrection, yes, but it also encodes the agricultural cycle of planting and harvest. The story of the phoenix burning and being reborn from ashes describes both cosmic cycles and the practical technique of controlled burns to enrich soil. Greek myths about heroes descending to the underworld and returning preserve memory of cave systems used as shelters during catastrophes. Norse myths about Ragnarok, the end of the world, contain detailed descriptions of astronomical events, volcanic eruptions, and climate chaos, all wrapped in the story of gods fighting monsters. Hindu texts describe weapons of unimaginable power, the Brahmastra, which could destroy entire armies, flying vehicles called vimanas, knowledge of atoms and cosmic cycles spanning millions of years. For centuries, scholars read these as fantasy, but physicists studying ancient Sanskrit found descriptions of nuclear reactions, of fallout, of radiation sickness. Archaeologists found vitrified cities in India where stone had been melted by temperatures only achievable through nuclear explosions or cosmic impacts. The survivors knew that future civilizations might not understand technical language. Technologies change. Languages evolve. But stories? Stories are universal. So they hid science inside myth, wrapped data in narrative, preserved truth in tales that would be told around fires for 10,000 years. And then there's the third method of preservation, perhaps the most remarkable of all. They encoded knowledge in us, in our biology, in our DNA, in our instincts. Why do humans instinctively look to the sky when we sense danger? Why do we feel uneasy before earthquakes, even before our instruments detect them? Why can some people sense weather changes days in advance? Why do certain sounds, certain frequencies, certain vibrations affect us so profoundly? Because we carry ancestral memory. Epigenetic inheritance, science now confirms, allows traumatic experiences to be passed to offspring. Survivors of catastrophes don't just pass on stories, they pass on heightened awareness, enhanced intuition, survival instincts coded into the very structure of our genes. The survivors of the last catastrophe, the people who watched their world end, who lived through the floods and the fires and the darkness, their terror, their knowledge, their adaptations became part of us. We are their descendants, and we carry their warnings in our blood. And this is why humans across the world, regardless of culture, share certain primal fears. Fear of darkness, fear of deep water, fear of fire, fear of the ground shaking. These aren't learned behaviors. These are inherited memories of when these things meant the end of everything. But the survivors encoded more than fear. They encoded knowledge. People with no astronomical training can sometimes predict weather with uncanny accuracy. Indigenous navigators can cross thousands of miles of ocean without instruments. Certain individuals possess heightened sensitivity to magnetic fields, allowing them to orient themselves without compasses. These abilities surface in scattered populations around the world, usually in groups who claim descent from ancient lineages, from survivors, from the ones who came before. Modern geneticists studying isolated populations in the Andes, in the Himalayas, in remote Pacific islands, have found unusual genetic markers that don't fit anywhere in our evolutionary tree, genes that seem older than they should be, genes that suggest inheritance from a population that should not exist according to conventional timelines. These populations also preserve the oldest flood myths, the most detailed catastrophe stories, the clearest memories of the world before. And here's what makes this preservation so profound, so urgent, so vital to understand. The survivors didn't just preserve the past, they preserved warnings for the future, for us. In every tradition, the myths don't just describe what happened, they describe the signs to watch for, the warnings that appear before the cycle turns, the sky changes, strange lights, unusual colors, auroras appearing where they shouldn't. Animals behave erratically, migrating at wrong times, beaching themselves, abandoning their young. The earth trembles more frequently, dormant volcanoes wake, magnetic compasses drift. Weather becomes unpredictable, swinging between extremes. And in the final phase, the myths say, humanity itself changes. We grow arrogant, divided, obsessed with power and possession. We stop listening to the old wisdom. We dismiss the warnings. We believe ourselves beyond the reach of natural forces. This is the pattern the myths preserve, not to frighten us, but to prepare us, to give us a chance the previous civilizations didn't have, because the survivors, those remarkable people who lived through the end of their world and built the beginning of ours, they understood something crucial. The cycle returns. It always returns. But knowledge, preserved carefully in stone and story and DNA, gives each new civilization a chance to see it coming, a chance to remember, a chance to prepare. And now, as you drift deeper into sleep, as these ancient voices whisper through your dreams, consider this. What if we, the seventh civilization, are finally ready to hear what they tried so hard to tell us? What if we're finally capable of understanding that the myths aren't fantasies to be dismissed, but blueprints to be followed? Instructions for survival written by people who loved us enough to leave messages across 12,000 years of silence. Rest now. Let the survivor's wisdom settle into your bones, because in the next part of our journey, we will examine the most unsettling question of all. What signs are appearing in our modern world that match the warnings preserved in the ancient myths? We live in an age of wonders. Cities of light stretching to the horizon. Technology connecting every corner of the globe. Knowledge accumulated across centuries available at our fingertips. We've mapped the human genome, sent robots to Mars, cured diseases, extended lifespans. By every measure, we should feel secure in our advancement, confident in our trajectory, certain of our future. But beneath the surface of our modern confidence, something is shifting. Something subtle but unmistakable. Something that makes the ancient myths suddenly feel less like stories and more like memories stirring in the depths of time. The signs are appearing, the same signs the myths told us to watch for. Let's begin with the sky. In recent years, auroras have been appearing in places they haven't been seen in centuries. The northern lights, usually confined to polar regions, have been photographed as far south as Arizona, Texas, even Mexico. Atmospheric phenomena scientists struggle to explain light up the night with colors that don't fit our models. The sun behaves strangely. Solar cycles that once followed predictable patterns now display unexpected intensity. Solar flares powerful enough to disrupt satellites, to knock out power grids, to interfere with communications have been increasing in frequency. Scientists warn that a Carrington event-level solar storm, like the one that hit Earth in 1859, could happen again. And if it did, in our modern, technology-dependent world, the damage would be catastrophic. The myths spoke of the sky changing before the catastrophe. Strange lights, colors that shouldn't be, the heavens themselves seeming to warn those with eyes to see. Now look at the Earth. Seismic activity is increasing globally, not dramatically, not apocalyptically, but measurably. Volcanic systems dormant for centuries are showing signs of life. Iceland's volcanoes, quiet for so long, have awakened. Yellowstone's supervolcano, monitored constantly, shows unusual thermal activity. The ring of fire encircling the Pacific experiences more frequent earthquakes, larger tremors, patterns that make geologists nervous, even if they're hesitant to alarm the public. The magnetic field, Earth's invisible shield protecting us from solar radiation, is weakening. The North Magnetic Pole is drifting at an accelerating rate, moving faster now than at any time in recorded history. Scientists have had to update navigation systems repeatedly to account for the shift. Some models suggest we may be in the early stages of a magnetic reversal, when north and south flip, something that last happened 780,000 years ago. During such a reversal, the field weakens significantly, potentially leaving Earth vulnerable to radiation from space. The myths spoke of times when compasses failed. when birds flew in wrong directions, when the very earth seemed disoriented. And the waters, ocean currents that drive global weather patterns, are slowing. The Gulf Stream, which keeps Europe warm, has decreased in strength by 15% in recent decades. If it were to stop completely, Europe's climate would resemble Canada's. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation shows similar weakness. These changes don't happen gradually over thousands of years. They can flip suddenly, tipping into a new state within decades or even years. Sea levels are rising, yes, but that's not the most concerning part. What worries oceanographers is the acceleration. Greenland's ice sheet isn't melting linearly, it's melting exponentially. Antarctic ice shelves the size of small countries have collapsed in months. Coastal cities plan for flooding that seemed centuries away a decade ago, but now feels imminent. The myths spoke of the seas rising without warning, swallowing coastlines, drowning cities in days. We always thought such stories were exaggerations. But modern science shows that during previous warming periods, sea levels rose by dozens of feet in geological instants. What seemed impossible in myth becomes merely forgotten history. Then there's the climate itself. Weather patterns that held stable for centuries are breaking down. 100-year storms happen every few years now. Droughts persist where rain once fell reliably. Floods drown regions that were arid. Temperature records are shattered, then broken again. The jet stream, that river of air that guides weather systems, meanders erratically, bringing polar cold to temperate zones and tropical heat to the north. Scientists speak cautiously about tipping points, thresholds beyond which changes become irreversible. Ice albedo feedback loops, methane release from thawing permafrost, rainforest dieback, ocean acidification. Each of these systems can trigger cascading effects, accelerating changes in ways our models struggle to predict. The myths warned of seasons failing, of summer and winter colliding, of the natural order becoming chaos. But perhaps most unsettling are the animals. Around the world, creatures behave in ways that disturb ecologists. Whales beach themselves in unprecedented numbers. Birds migrate at wrong times or not at all. Insects vanish from regions where they thrived for millennia. Fish populations collapse. Coral reefs bleach white and die. Some animals seem to sense something we don't. Dogs bark at nothing. Cats hide before earthquakes instruments haven't detected yet. Flocks of birds veer suddenly, as if avoiding invisible obstacles. Traditional peoples who live close to the land report that animals seem confused, disoriented, as if they've lost an internal compass. The myths spoke of animals fleeing before the catastrophe, of nature itself warning those who knew how to listen. And finally, there's us, humanity itself. We grow more connected, yet more divided. Technology gives us the ability to communicate instantly with anyone on Earth, yet we fracture into isolated groups, speaking past each other. We accumulate more knowledge than any previous civilization, yet struggle to agree on basic facts. We achieve greater material abundance, yet report increasing anxiety, depression, and a sense that something fundamental is missing. The myths warned that before the catastrophe, humanity would become obsessed with itself, forgetting the larger rhythms of the cosmos, dismissing the warnings, believing ourselves beyond the reach of natural law. We build towers of glass and steel reaching toward the sky, just as the myths said Babel did before it fell. We manipulate the building blocks of life itself through genetic engineering. We split atoms and reshape landscapes. We discuss colonizing other planets while the one beneath our feet trembles. The patterns are there, the signs are present, and they match, point for point, the warnings preserved in myths around the world. But here's what makes this moment different from all the previous cycles, different from the 6 civilizations that came before us. We can see it coming. We have instruments to measure what our ancestors could only feel. We have global communication to share information that once took years to spread. And we have, for the first time in human history, the ability to look at these signs not as isolated problems, but as part of a larger pattern. The question that haunts the quiet hours of the night is this: if we can see the pattern, if we can recognize the signs, if we finally understand that the myths were not fantasies, but warnings, what do we do with that knowledge? Do we dismiss it? Convince ourselves this time is different? Trust that our technology will save us? Or do we do what the survivors of previous civilizations did? Preserve, prepare, remember, build in stone, encode in story, teach the next generation not just how to live in good times, but how to endure when the cycle turns and the world transforms overnight. These are not comfortable questions, they're not designed to be. But as you drift towards sleep, as these thoughts settle into your mind, consider that discomfort might be exactly what the myths intended to create. Not panic, not despair, but awareness, preparation, the willingness to look at what's happening and name it for what it is. Because the myths suggest something crucial. The catastrophe doesn't come without warning. The signs appear first, visible to those paying attention, giving those who recognize them time to prepare, to preserve, to position themselves to survive and carry knowledge forward. We are, perhaps, in that warning phase now. The subtle tremors before the quake, the strange lights before the storm, the moment when the survivors of the past reach across 12,000 years of silence and whisper, pay attention. Remember what we taught you. The cycle is turning again. Part 6. The Architecture of Memory. If we accept, even as a possibility, that 6 civilizations rose and fell before ours, then one question becomes pressing. Where are they? Where is the evidence? Why don't we find their ruins everywhere, their artifacts filling museums, their writing covering ancient walls? The answer, the myths suggest, lies in understanding what a true cataclysm Imagine for a moment that
modern civilization ended tomorrow, not through gradual decline, but through sudden catastrophe, a solar storm that fries every electronic system on Earth, or a series of megaquakes fracturing our cities, or a rapid climate shift bringing years of volcanic winter. What would survive? Our glass towers would shatter, our steel would corrode within centuries, our books, stored digitally, would vanish instantly. Physical libraries might last longer, but paper burns, molds, disintegrates. Our plastics would persist, but scattered, broken, eventually weathering to nothing. Within 1,000 years, nature would reclaim almost everything, but some things would last. Stone monuments, if massive enough, gold and precious metals buried deep, ceramics in dry climates, and knowledge, if encoded carefully in forms designed to transcend language and culture. This is exactly what we find when we look carefully at the archaeological record. Not because earlier civilizations didn't exist, but because only their most durable creations survived. The megalithic structures scattered across the globe are not primitive monuments built by people barely beyond the Stone Age. They are the most durable remnants of sophisticated civilizations that built in many materials, but for which only the stones survived. Consider the precision of ancient masonry. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, stones weighing over 100 tons fit together so perfectly that a sheet of paper cannot slide between them. No mortar? Just stone on stone, shaped with such accuracy that they've survived earthquakes that destroyed Spanish colonial buildings built centuries later. In Egypt, the granite boxes in the Serapeum of Saqqara were carved from single pieces of stone weighing up to 100 tons, with internal corners so precise they measure 90 degrees to within a few seconds of arc. Modern machinists admit they would struggle to achieve such precision even with computer-guided equipment. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones are cut with such accuracy that they interconnect like massive Lego blocks. Internal angles, external faces, all machined to tolerances that suggest advanced tools we have no record of. The conventional explanation is that ancient people achieved these feats with copper tools, patience, and time. But experiments trying to replicate the precision using proposed ancient methods consistently fail. The tools available to cultures at that time simply cannot produce the results we observe, which suggests either that our timeline is wrong or that these cultures possess knowledge and technology we don't know about. Knowledge that might have been inherited from an earlier civilization, technology that might have been remembered from before the catastrophe. Then there's the global similarity of architectural techniques. Polygonal masonry, that distinctive style of fitting irregular stones together, complex three-dimensional puzzles, appears in Peru, Japan, Egypt, Easter Island, and Lebanon. These sites are separated by oceans and supposedly developed independently, yet the technique is identical down to fine details. Why would cultures with no contact develop the same complex building method unless it wasn't developed multiple times, unless it was taught by survivors carrying knowledge from a previous civilization, by teachers spreading across the post-cataclysm world, showing the remnants of humanity how to build in ways that would survive the next catastrophe? The astronomical alignments present an even deeper mystery. Structures around the world align to celestial events with precision that requires sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. But they don't align to the current sky. They align to the sky as it appeared thousands